Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Monday, February 17th, 2025. Time for another show. Our 50th anniversary show. Not for another 28, I don't know how many years. We would have to go until then. But one of the few popular culture simulcasts, I guess, in which I actually participated and watched in real time. I think I had to. I had to watch it on Peacock streaming. I know that sounds a little weird, doesn't it? I don't think that I could pause that or rewind that or anything, so I must have watched it in real time. It happened more or less between the hours that I anticipated. So, I guess I did. That's fun. That's more interesting. And even though you have a pretty good idea of what they're going to show from prior years retrospectively and who's going to be there as guests, same as the State of the Union, but I don't know, somehow more entertaining. So that one I watched. And I had hoped to discuss that with Greg Dworkin, because I figured he probably watched it too. But as it turns out, an ice storm has brought down a power line nearby, and I guess the electricity is in short supply. Although I think he said his power is still on, but that the power may go down at any time because they'll be doing power line work and et cetera, et cetera. It's across his driveway, I think. You can't get out. The birds can go right over it. They can fly, as it turns out. And so they visit. The bears have to go around. And we'll see if things get repaired in time for tomorrow's show. Perhaps Greg can stop by tomorrow. Wednesday, I'm out. I'm out of here. I come back Thursday, but won't be able to do a live show on Wednesday due to previously scheduled doctor's appointments. And I know they know when I do the show, but they don't care. And I have to work around their golf schedule or whatever it is that they're doing. Probably not in the winter golf, but these doctors with the whole, I'm only going to be doing these things on these days, and you know how it goes. Anyway, so we'll see whether we can arrange something for tomorrow and whether the power line is repaired. It's not a guarantee. There was a lot of ice all over the place up there in Connecticut, and so what can you do? Anyway, we do have the abbreviated pundit roundup with us regardless. It worked around the power line, so we can certainly refer back there and point out what Greg found important. I don't know if any of it is about Saturday Night Live, though, which is what I wanted to kind of talk about. I don't know. Good show, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. I don't really have anything to add to that. Though actually the most interesting part was during the show, scrolling through IMDb and finding out how many people had been on the show and when, and people that I didn't remember at all. It was very interesting. So, la-di frickin' da. That whole weekend is over. They were doing things all weekend. There was a concert of the musical acts that had been on the show on Friday. That one, not so much for me. And I also forgot. And then Saturday, I guess nothing, because they were gearing up for the big Sunday version of Saturday Night Live. And I'm not 100% certain why they did it that way, but I don't know. Maybe to make it more like a Super Bowl event. Anyway, over the weekend, maybe the Trump forces and Doge forces were all paying attention to the Saturday Night Live stuff, too. It wasn't a calm weekend, and plenty of stories generated, but it seemed to me more about the news guys catching up to what had happened the week before, and to some extent looking ahead, than about Donald Trump out there blabbing and saying dumb stuff and making news. There were some people away at a conference in Munich, and I always get nervous about conferences in Munich, but this one was a European security conference, and a lot of American presence there, some from the administration, which is to say people who are going to come and say, yeah, we're not into European security, and some from the legislature, Congress, if you remember those guys, who presumably showed up to say, we actually think that there should be, cooperation between the United States and Europe on matters of security. And we're not sure what these guys are going to do and what they're going to say and what they're going to try to wreck between us. But this would be a good opportunity. I wasn't wild about the idea of, say participating in the conference versus, like say sticking around and slowing down the processes of nominations, etc. In the Senate. But that was all coming to an end as it is. I think the nominations that got taken care of beforehand so that members could make their flights to Munich were confirmed. It was sooner than they had to be confirmed in some cases, but by a couple of hours, 5, 6, 7 hours. They had 30 hours post-cloture to waste on some of the most egregious nominations. And I guess there was an argument to be made for saying, well, they're the most egregious. We should take all 30 hours on this. On the other hand, it's difficult to gauge how important it was to show up in Munich as a representative of the United States government and speak to allies and say, not all of us are falling in line with this. Not all of us are crazy. We'd like to do what we can to try to find a way to work around him. It's very difficult in the area of national security to work around the president. But, I'd like to hear what you guys are thinking. What are you people planning on doing in the absence of the United States as a leader in European and North Atlantic security? How are you going to react to this? What sort of are you going to burn all the bridges? Are there back lines of communication that you and I should keep open? Do you need anything from us? I don't know. There's no way to fly over there and just fix national and international security in the face of a president determined to dismantle all of it. But it wasn't, I think, in their minds anyway, pretty important to go. And equally important not to be absent for the vote, even though the outcome of the vote was a foregone conclusion. I'm thinking that their thinking was that it would be better to allow for 6 more hours of RFK confirmed as Health and Human Services Secretary than it would have been to delay it by 6 hours and miss the conference, or not to delay it, but to allow the vote to go ahead 6 hours later instead and not be on hand to cast the no vote. The result of the vote would have been the same, but they would have come home to angry constituents saying, why didn't you even bother to vote no? I know you were going to lose, but at least symbolically or, and more than symbolically, stand there and say, no, this is a terrible idea. So I think their compromise was, I do believe it's actually important for me to meet with counterparts in European and international security this weekend. And I do believe it's important that I be on the record in opposition. And the only way to make that happen is to make both happen is to, if the only way to do it is to let the guy in 4, 5, 6 hours sooner than we absolutely would have had to do it, all right, go ahead and do it. But that stoked anger of a different kind anyway. And it's going to be one or the other. And I guess they chose what they thought was the anger they were less worried about, perhaps. I know. Everybody wants them to put up as much of a fight as possible. And in many cases, they want to put up as much of a fight as possible as well. Not all of them are super enthused about it. Not all of them have the same idea about what it means to fight. But, they get together in their caucus and they come up with a consensus solution. And even though there will be people who disagree with it, either because they're not going to the Munich conference or they're willing to take a flight and miss the first day or take a flight later, I don't know. But did they get outvoted in the caucus is the question. The caucus decided, when it comes to a unanimous consent request, this one made by Republicans, the answer is preordained by a meeting and a decision of the caucus. Sometimes it doesn't rise to the level where they need to have a vote over it, but the majority leader's office may make a recommendation to people. But, if you're dead set against it and you want to stand athwart the caucus, not conference, the caucus, and not history either, and shout, no, you have the right to do that. You're just going to make your colleagues mad at you, but you have the right to do that. But not the way the Democrats work typically. If they get together and discuss it and they say, all told, it's probably best if we all make that flight, those of us who are going, and they say, well, I disagree with that, but for the sake of, having us be able to work together in more or less in harmony, I didn't get my way. I would have wanted to wait another 6 hours, but maybe you'll go my way on the next one. Then they work it out, and the floor representatives of the minority party know very well what the decision of the caucus was. And it's not like you're being caught by surprise. Like they make if the other side makes a unanimous consent request that is catching you by surprise, well, not all senators are as skilled, I suppose, but the mechanism is there to say, well, you can't just make up. I mean, you can, but I won't allow you to just make up a unanimous consent request on the spot that I don't have a chance to review, comb over, make sure I know exactly what the ramifications are, and discuss it with my colleagues. And if you do make a unanimous consent request like that, I would simply, you see that from time to time, they'll say, they'll tell the presiding officer, when they ask, is there any objection? They'll say, well, reserving the right to object. And I do not object at this time, but reserving the right to object, I have a parliamentary inquiry for the senator from wherever, maybe whoever made the request or of someone, and you can try and get it straightened out. And then, of course, in the end, if you just can't figure the thing out, you say, well, I do object. And if it turns out you were wrong and there was, in fact, an agreement worked out between the majority and minority leader off the floor and you just didn't know about it or you didn't understand it or whatever, the objection will destroy the unanimous consent request. They'll have a quorum call. They'll play classical music if you're watching it on C-SPAN 2. And the parties will convene off the floor and say, what happened? What are you objecting to? I thought we had an agreement. Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. Or I got worried about that one part where you said page 25 was going to be deleted. Or that we were going to have the vote at 4 p.m. instead of 6 p.m. I didn't hear about that. I didn't get that memo. Well, now that you've seen the memo, what do you think? Well, I disagree, but I see that we've made that deal. I don't want to stand in the way of my colleagues for whatever reason having made that deal. So here's what we'll do. Let's go back on the floor, ask unanimous consent to suspend the quorum call. You make the exact same unanimous consent request again, and I won't object. Easy. So if you see a unanimous consent request that you disagree with that's made like that, it's almost assuredly not done because people are like, I don't know. I've never heard this one before. I don't know what to do. I don't know. Should we let it go? It's because they've seen it, reviewed it, decided that it's the lesser of two evils or, whatever. Is it sometimes the easier route? The path of least resistance when you're supposed to be on the path of most resistance? Yes, sometimes. For instance, let's not have any witnesses in the impeachment trial because I have Valentine's Day dinner. Yeah, troublesome, to say the least. But it's not that it didn't get discussed and that the majority of the caucus didn't decide, I don't know if we're really going to get anywhere with witnesses on this one. I don't know why they came to the decision. I would have been voting for witnesses. But, you have a discussion, have a vote, settle on something, and then that's the position of the Democratic caucus. And you can be a fractious a-hole and objecting freelance every time, but they'll eventually stop inviting you to the conferences as well. So, there's a price to be paid from that one. All right, so I don't know. That one seemed to be something to think about and something that happened over the weekend and something people were objecting to that, it's a valid objection. You just opted for a different strategy than the conference did, and there's a million moving parts to everything, and sometimes they make the wrong decision. There is that too. Anyway, other things that I've collected over the weekend that I thought might be worthy of discussion, or things that Greg collected over the weekend he thought might be worthy of discussion. In fact, from today's abbreviated pundit roundup, a good reminder from right here in the title, Eric Adams' fallout continues. Will Bunch at the Philly Inquirer points out that there's more to it, of course, than just Eric Adams' own well-being or the embarrassment of New York City or what have you, or the flex of power possibly from Albany and possibly removing him from office. That was all a big topic of discussion. There is such a procedure as far as I'm aware. I don't know the ins and outs of that state procedure, but I was reminded over the early part of the weekend, maybe prior to the weekend, that New York is not alone in that, and that other states have at least threatened to exercise such power. For example, in the case of Detroit, former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, right, who had been convicted at that point, but was still in office. Apparently, the governor of Michigan retains a similar power and was in fact moving, it was Jennifer Granholm, moving to remove him as mayor. So this was, in the works, and they even had a formal procedure all blocked out, and the governor convened it and everything and was ready to hold a hearing and make a decision and render it right in the hearing. When, I think they went ahead with the hearing only because they knew what the outcome was going to be. They had already in hand news of his resignation. So he resigned rather than be removed from office, which mooted the whole thing, and they just adjourned the proceedings. But I bring up the fact that it was done in the past only because apparently the threat of removing a New York City mayor has got some of the punditry, tied up in knots. Well, this seems so anti-democratic. We shouldn't be doing this. It's set a bad precedent. Always something to think about. But one, the precedent, it doesn't. They don't have to set precedent. It's a matter of law. This power exists. Well, if we start removing people from office because what? Because of corruption? Because of demonstrated corruption? Yes. Well, then what? Well, then they'll start removing people from office when they hold the governorship for non-corrupt reasons. Maybe. I don't think so. There could be a dispute over whether or not the corruption is true and real. Okay, I could see that. But like down in Florida, Ron DeSantis was removing Democratic elected officials left and right. The elected state's attorneys, the DAs for, they're using a different term than it, but state attorneys who were Democrats, removed from office, reelected, removed again. It's not New York. But if you're worried about, we'll set a precedent for, or Republicans will retaliate where they hold the governorships. Well, we're too late for that. Republicans are already, quote unquote, retaliating, not even waiting for us to taliate the first time. Anyway, this is a familiar problem that we have had with a number of issues, including filibuster reform. And what can I tell you? And also, when people are corrupt and in serious legal jeopardy, that's what the statute's for. It's not about retaliation. But of course, Republicans apparently have come to view since Adams offered to help them enforce their immigration goals, have come to the view that the prosecution of Eric Adams was horribly political because reasons. He's a Democrat. They were anxious to prosecute him themselves until they found out that they could work out a deal and make him act like a Republican. And at that point, the prosecution became overly political. They couldn't stand it anymore. But Will Bunch makes the point that the real victims of Eric Adams' New York City corrupt bargain might be the people who end up, rounded up by the Immigration Service, and two, they might end up in Guantanamo. That's really kind of unfair, like swapping continued tenure in office where everybody hates you. And the price is, a bunch of people I don't know or care about end up in Guantanamo. That's bad. And it's a good point. And this snippet of his piece is included in Greg's roundup from today. Thousands of New York City immigrants are in the crosshairs of the corrupt deal Eric Adams made with Trump's Justice Department, and yet we're not paying nearly enough attention to the real victims of Trump's lawyer's indecent proposal and Adams's narcissistic willingness to go along with it. When I think of the political rot that's eating away at the Big Apple, I see people like Isabel Miranda, a 39-year-old recent refugee from Colombia who lives in downtown Manhattan shelter with her 2 young children and is scared her family could be ripped apart by the next knock from Trump's federal mass deportation cops. It makes you desperate. You go out and they look at us as if we're delinquents who came here to destroy the country, and that's not the case, Miranda told NBC News in her native Spanish recently. We contribute, too, because we work hard and we do the tough work. The only thing I ask for is that my children remain safe because I can't go back to Colombia. You know, more or less the story we've heard from just about everybody, that they're being unduly targeted. They just wanted to come here and make a new and safe life for themselves, and they're perfectly willing to work hard and contribute, but it doesn't matter because brown. And that's where we are. Let's see. Other items that Greg rounded up from various sources. Let's see. All of the shenanigans continued over the weekend from the Doge characters and, of course, in the Sovereign District of New York. I think in the end we saw 7 resignations from the Department of Justice rather than finding somebody signing the paperwork to dismiss the Eric Adams case. They did, of course, I think you would have heard this by now, find somebody to go ahead and do it. There are some great rundowns, TikToks, as the news kids call them, in the New York Times and the Washington Post and elsewhere, detailing how they came to this decision. I think, was it by Friday, did we know that they had essentially locked the public integrity unit in a room, and their boss, by the way, I've learned that he pronounces his last name Beauvais, not Bove. So, I don't know, it was a little closer to the Beauvais, these nuts jokes work out much better. Emil, does he say Emil or does he say Emil? Anyway, Beauvais locked them all in a room and said, you got 1 hour to find somebody, one of you guys, 2 of you people actually, have to sign this motion to dismiss the case or else something. I guess you're all fired. And long story short there, a guy by the name of Ed Sullivan, if I'm not mistaken about that, which seems kind of funny, he put on a really great shoe, and he decided he's been at the department for many, many years and has had some difficulties in the past, and said, my record isn't exactly spotless, and I've been here for a long time, and I'm nearing retirement. I'll spare the rest of you, younger attorneys. I'll sign it, and then I don't know what. I guess he'll either, I don't know whether he's thinking of resigning or like now my retirement is secure because I did this thing. I don't know. At any rate, he decided to go ahead and sign it. So word is that the signatures were given, although the paperwork I saw had one handwritten signature and one like electronic signature, which I think is okay. But by the time I stopped paying attention to it on Friday afternoon, it had been signed and distributed to the press, but it was not docketed. So once again, paperwork being a problem. I assume at that point somebody has gone, but who knows? These people are so incompetent at paperwork, they may not have docketed the thing and actually gotten the case dismissed. But if not, I assume it's coming soon. Maybe the courts were closed and the clerks were gone by the time they actually got a signature on the thing. Well, who knows? But it is something to catch up on. The other things that Greg pointed out here, what have we here? Republican lawmakers are cowards, and here's why. John Harwood writing this piece here. The moral and intellectual collapse of the Republican Party is the gaping chest wound of America. That's some language for you. Democratic strategists and commentators have spent weeks diagnosing the party's ills for good reason. They just lost an election they expected to win. But for the American body politic, that represents the equivalent of examining a sprained ankle while ignoring a gaping chest wound. The gaping chest wound is the moral and intellectual collapse of the Republican Party. Yeah, that's an issue. The GOP's descent into nihilism as some pronounce it, has become so familiar as to almost escape notice. That's a good point, too. Indeed, the reason Democratic shortcomings attract more scrutiny, this is probably on Greg's mind, why he chose this section. The reason Democratic shortcomings attract more scrutiny is that serious-minded people now take for granted that only Democrats remain capable of running our government consistent with the rule of law. And the only ones capable of hearing, understanding, and absorbing criticism, and who won't send you to Guantanamo just for issuing that criticism. Elon Musk, The Economist tells us, is failing to cut American spending. How do you like that? Now, he's gone around saying, I've cut $100 bazillion in spending, but not so far. And, of course, where's the money? It's ephemeral. It's floating out there. It's not like it's now back in people's bank accounts or anything like that. And as others have pointed out, I did see somebody make an interesting point of this yesterday. See if I can dig this up during the break. Cutting one side of the balance sheet doesn't actually mean anything. As they were saying, as Doge is claiming, well, we cut $100 million or $100 billion out of the budget. How did you do it? By canceling $100 billion worth of programs or anticipated spending or firing people and cutting the payroll. Yes, okay. But on the other hand, as he says, could I say, this person made this comment, could I say I cut $2,000 worth of spending? I saved $2,000 by declining to pay my mortgage this month. Well, no. Penalties will ensue. You've just cost yourself more money than you thought you saved. Similar, even with the budget, even though it's not done around a real kitchen table.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So it was Law Prof blog, blog, B-L-A-W-G, blog, you see, because law is in the word blog. Okay, it was Law Prof blog who pointed that out, grabbing from Twitter, presumably, the tweet of some blue check wackadoodle saying Elon Musk and Doge, Dodgy as we say it here, have reportedly, and it is reportedly, but it should be purportedly, saved the U.S. over $100 billion. And here is a picture of, well, a smiling and now ejected from Dodgy Vivek Ramaswamy, House Speaker Mike Johnson in the middle, a bearded figure of some sort in the background who I don't know, and Elon Musk with AXPQ 25X92 Hut Omaha, the sun, on his shoulders, looking, actually less than pleased about being there. I don't know how much this kid is enjoying it. And at this point, they had him dressed up in a little suit, and he didn't seem to like that very much. Anyway, Law Prof blog commenting on this. You cannot determine whether you saved or cost money based solely on one side of the ledger. Example, I saved my household $2,000 by not paying the mortgage, right? And you see how that... So now the mortgage is late and you're incurring penalties and damage to your credit rating and who knows what other sorts of things that might cost you money down the road just because you, quote unquote, saved $2,000 by not paying people what you owed them. Well, one, you still owe it to them and now you owe them more and you're incurring long-term damage likely at some point, especially if you keep on doing it, to your credit rating, which will cost you more money if you need to borrow in the future, etc., etc., etc. You see how this might work. Anyway, back to what Greg was pointing out here, right? The Economist was saying that Elon was, in fact, failing to cut spending. Dodgy has so far disrupted everything in government, bar the deficit. Hasn't disrupted that very much. In large part, this is because of the way America's budget is structured. But who cares about that? The government is on track to spend $7 trillion this year. Nearly two-thirds of this consists of mandatory expenditures on Social Security and health insurance. Interest payments account for over 10%. That leaves a quarter of the budget for discretionary spending, a category in which, in theory, is somewhat easier to trim, except that half of it goes on to defense, and Republicans would like to increase such spending. In other words, no matter how aggressive Dodgy is, its actions are focused on barely more than a tenth of the overall federal budget. So there is that phenomenon as well. Seth Maskett writing here on his Substack, why Trump's targets are so specific and the pushback is so vague. Interesting way of setting the table here. In some ways, he writes, it's a relatively obscure set of targets, USAID, the Treasury payment system, indirect costs at NIH, etc., are things that the vast majority of Americans have never heard of. For the most part, people are unaware that these programs have enormous impacts on lots of different aspects of the government and American life. What's more, to the extent people know much about these programs, they probably don't like them. Americans tend to have a vastly inflated estimation of how much foreign assistance the U.S. provides. We've heard that before. And they want that arbitrarily high guess of a number reduced. Singling out USAID sounds like a good idea to many of them, especially the sort of folks that Trump wants to impress. And, of course, we've heard along the way that there were various investigations by USAID into things like how Elon Musk used, sold, and manipulated Starlink overseas, that a lot of the people fired from the Food and Drug Administration over the weekend would have been in position to regulate Neuralink and various other items of personal and pecuniary interest to Elon Musk, that basically among the leading targets, the early targets for these terminations were organizations that stood in the way of Elon Musk being able to exploit people for more money. And so he got them out of the way. So, yeah, that too also available. At this point, maybe a good switch over point to what's in pocket. And some of the things that I, at some point, when I was thinking about such things over the weekend, thought might be important to bring to you. Let's see. One item I think, widely circulated this morning from the Washington Post. I'm just not sure about exactly how much of this we would want to read, but it does seem to indicate there's a Washington Post piece here entitled Records Show How Dodgy Planned Trump's DEI Purge and Who Gets Fired Next. An interesting piece. This, though, from, the 15th would have been, is that Saturday? The interesting part of it is it almost makes it look like they've brought a lawyer or two in. I mean, they did. There's a person named and everything, and the firm that they came from, and that they're kind of, in some cases, actually possibly paying some attention to the law as it currently exists, and doing, I think, the things that most people thought the second Trump administration would be more adept at and would make their practice. Things like, instead of just unlawfully firing everybody or entire departments, which they ended up doing, and now they're stuck in lawsuits. There are temporary restraining orders preventing it. News organizations really need to get used to using the purportedly phrasing about these things. 1,000 people laid off from blah blah blah. It needs to be purportedly laid off, because if a judge says no, they're not laid off because you did the whole thing illegally and you owe them money for this week, even though some of them didn't come to work because you told them not to. You're going to be embarrassed if you say that 1,000 people were laid off and then 2 days later it turns out they're not laid off. But I guess I anticipated that they would do things more along the lines of, people aren't or eliminating departments that are, statutorily required. In some cases, a sort of a satellite office of the EEOC. There's an equal employment opportunity office in each of the departments and in each of the bureaus to make sure that you're, in compliance and not violating people's civil rights. And I know the dodgy people consider that essentially to be the same thing as DEI. It is not. But then again, there was nothing wrong with DEI in the first place. But they have these vague ideas about what they don't like. And they want to fire everybody who has anything to do with it. But some of these offices are statutorily mandated. And I guess my thought initially was, in the second administration, they'll do things like they didn't do these mass firings in the first administration for some reason. But that they would come in and they would say, all right, the lawyer knows that the department has to exist. Fine. One person will remain in the department. It now exists and everybody else is fired. Don't eliminate the department because that'll land us in legal trouble. But let's push the envelope and say it can exist with one person. Or, in some cases, I guess you could try to say it can exist with 0 people and an AI chatbot. I don't know. But they were going to try to push the limit. But instead, they did it overzealously or eliminated things that are statutorily mandatory or, and of course, in every case, blew right past the Administrative Procedure Act. So this is interesting in that it makes it look like there might have been actually more thought given to how can we do this within the law than has been in evidence to date. On the other hand, it is equally revealing of how ridiculous and stupid, and I guess you would say in APA parlance, arbitrary and capricious their decision-making has been. But it'll be interesting when we see judges have to decide, is saying, I don't like woke ideology, is it meaningful enough to escape the charge that it is per se arbitrary and capricious? To me, my initial answer is no, but I could see where federal judges might say, it's not well defined, but it's not by itself arbitrary and capricious. A lot of people don't agree with the definition or think it's vague, but it's not arbitrary and capricious. The fact that they went and searched out people who have these key words in their titles, in the titles of the office that they work in the position description that they occupy, whatever it may be, is not arbitrary. I mean, it's targeted. That you could argue perhaps that the prejudice against it is arbitrary or even capricious. But once it's decided that as a matter of presidential executive discretion, you want this gone, as long as you're sticking to the plan to make sure that everybody who's eliminated has some demonstrable connection to it, might help you avoid the arbitrary and capricious problem, the arbitrariness and capriciousness of it, in fact. But I'm not certain that all judges will see it that way. So this was kind of an interesting tour of this stuff. And I don't know. This one is a very long read, it seemed like to me. But maybe it's worth parsing through just so you can see what I mean about some of this stuff might survive judicial challenge. Hannah Nathanson and Chris Deghanpur, my best stab at the surname here, are bylined here. A dodgy team plans to fire federal workers who are not in DEI roles and employees in offices that protect equal rights, internal documents show. And this part of the article was sort of like no duh. They want to fire as many people as possible. And it actually makes them look like they might even have been organized, which they weren't. But it makes it sound like they were a little more organized. Like, we're only going to go in there and fire people who something DEI. But of course, DEI only gets you so far. And then, of course, because they did things with basically database searches and just said, give me the names of everybody who works in anything that has, inclusion in it. Like, is that inclusion in the DEI sense? Maybe yes, maybe no. We don't really care. We want to fire as many people as possible anyway and reduce the payroll, so they're fired. And then, of course, as they go on to say, well, equal employment opportunity. Isn't that just DEI by another name? No. But even if it was, you'd still have to fire people or let them go according to the Administrative Procedure Act, and you're blowing straight past that. So here's the description, based, I guess, on the documents that they came up with. And a good portion of this article is, yeah, I know they're firing everybody who has anything to do with DEI. And yeah, I know they think equal employment opportunities and enjoying civil rights, and in some cases just being black, is a per se facial DEI violation. And we've read so many stories already about people expanding the mandate to things like, hey, it's Black History Month. You're not allowed to say that it's Black History Month, but it is one. Now, Trump signed a presidential proclamation declaring, as usual, February to be Black History Month. But for some reason, there are people out there who are like, yeah, you can't discuss that. When J.D. Vance and his weirdo wife went on tour. And who else was there? Oh, Pete Hegseth. When Pete Hegseth and his weirdo wife went on tour, this is what I'm thinking of schools overseas on military bases. Apparently the teachers quickly scrambling around saying, it's Black History Month. We have, posters of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman are up, various other African-American heroes from the ages. And we got to get rid of all of that. I have, a rainbow picture up, and people are going to say, rainbow, that's LGBTQIA plus, etc. Yeah, no, it's just a picture of a rainbow. God's covenant after Noah, like the one that even Mike Johnson believes in. No, get rid of the rainbows. Taking down their posters, taking down their rainbow things, taking down all sorts of things like share with a friend, anything like that. Hiding it before Pete Hegseth, the drunk's weirdo wife, the church lady, comes in and reports you for DEI violation. It's got people doing all sorts of crazy things. This article tells us that a team of workers from the U.S. Dodgy Service, which really, by the way, can we please, how much does it cost to put scare quotes around these names? Do us a favor, huh? Well, they developed, it says, step-by-step plans for carrying out President Donald Trump's order to purge diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives from the federal government. And over the next 6 months, intends to expand that campaign dramatically, according to documents obtained by the Washington Post. I'm not certain I would agree with the assessment, by the way, here. And it feels like a little bit like sane washing when they say they have a plan. And the plan is, well, on day one, the president will sign these executive orders. And then on days 1 through 30, we'll fire as many people as we can who have anything to do with the thing he signed the proclamation about. And then on days 31 through 60, we'll fire as many more people as we can find and squeeze under that definition. And then on days 60 through 90, we'll fire some more of them. And then after that, a couple more. Like, is that a plan? And when they say things like, well, when we run out of people who are working in DEI offices or jobs that are designated as having something to do with DEI, we'll will fire people who work in equal employment opportunity compliance or people who are black or whatever it is, and we'll just say that that's woke ideology. That's not really so much of a plan as a chatbot piece of garbage. Write me a plan that gets rid of diversity. All right, here. Fire diverse people. In the coming weeks, the document showed, Dodgy has planned for the Trump administration to trim staff from dozens of offices across the executive branch, including those that protect employee civil rights and others that investigate complaints of employment discrimination in the federal workplace. Got to get rid of them, or else those people will handle the lawsuits. Among the groups targeted are Veterans Affairs Office, an office at Veterans Affairs, that is, that works to ensure that all veterans receive equal access to care, and an office within Health and Human Services that provides information about the health of minority populations. That's the way you would find out that people are getting care, even though they're members of minority populations. But we can't have that. The Dodgy team is also looking to place on leave and ultimately fire scores of government employees who do not work in DEI roles, but who perform functions that Dodgy determined were related to DEI, the documents show. Now, some of these kids are 12. What do they know about whether or not something is related to DEI? We don't know. It is unclear precisely how Dodgy intends to decide whether employees' jobs are tied to DEI. Such a strategy will push, if not violate. It will violate. It will be arbitrary and capricious if you cannot demonstrate how you will determine it and put it on paper and let it be reviewed. It will violate if not, or push if not violate the law, and could draw legal challenges. Team members wrote in the documents. At least they're aware of that. They got that part right. Will be challenged. And I think that was the lawyer speaking. The internal documents revealed the scope, speed, and ambition of Dodgy's work. Over the past 3 weeks, Dodgy has torn through one federal agency after another, gaining access to sensitive data and winning control of the flow of federal cash. In a blitz that has shaken parts of Washington, Dodgy team members have identified swaths of jobs and programs to eliminate that do not match Trump's ideological views. And that's what underlies all of that. DEI is just one of several things that Trump will say, well, that doesn't match my ideological views. Well, true, but that's what puts you on the precipice of being arbitrary and capricious. You need to overcome that. Trump campaigned against DEI, calling it divisive and destructive, and has in recent days celebrated its demise under his administration. DEI, quote, would have ruined our country, and now it's dead, the president said last month. But even before Trump took office, Dodgy teams had included Elon Musk's top aides who have links to his companies, but little to no government or political experience, important in not knowing what you're doing, was planning actions far beyond Dodgy's original remit of reducing government's size and spending. Remember, they were there for efficiency's sake. How they got so wrapped up in DEI is anybody's guess. But basically they said, well, we want to reduce the size and scope of government. We know that Trump hates this particular function of government. Why don't we just fire those people? Whether it's efficient or not is a secondary consideration, but it may also put you in violation of your remit and therefore of the APA. In the weeks leading up to the inauguration, Dodgy positioned and envisioned itself as the executor and enforcer of Trump's executive order against diversity, which is a dumb thing to have an executive order against. Dodgy staffers developed a 3-part plan. Makes it sound like it was thought through. For Trump's anti-DEI campaign, internal documents show, Phase 1, in quotes here, that they enclose in scare quotes, marked the first day of Trump's presidency, when Trump signed an executive order stating that all DEI offices, positions, and programs within the executive branch must be terminated within 60 days. So Phase 1, Phase 1 should include work for you, but it doesn't in this case. Phase 1, I don't know, it's the thing that he did. Phase 2 is us reading it, and Phase 3 is us doing something about it. It's not really much of a plan. But let's see. Trump, of course, signed this executive order and said, you got to get rid of all this stuff within the next 60 days. The dodgy plan laid out how, on Inauguration Day, all federal agencies should begin placing DEI workers on paid leave and shutting down DEI websites and social media accounts. Those changes transpired almost exactly as dodgy laid out, because they're not hard. The nation is now in dodgy's phase 2, that 2 in scare quotes, which is scheduled to last until Wednesday. According to the documents, in this stage, Dodgy planned for the Trump administration to place on leave some employees working at statutorily required offices. The administration is also supposed to cancel DEI-focused federal contracts and grants, whatever that may mean. DEI-focused is in scare quotes. And the administration is meant to identify workers across the government who hold non-DEI jobs, but who can be tied to diversity initiatives through unspecified other means, according to the dodgy planning documents. And if the other means are unspecified, they're really not dodgy planning. They're very dodgy, and it's dodgy to call them plans. But, unspecified other means. And by the way, what will unspecified other means be? It will be things as ridiculous, but which might actually, might pass some muster with a super conservative judge. If you're not in a DEI role, how can you be fired for DEI tied things? And the answer is, if you went to a DEI training, very often mandated by the agency, if you had to go to mandatory training and you went and you sat there bored, staring out the window for half a day, a full day of DEI training, whether you absorbed it or not, whether you believed in it or not, whether you hated it, maybe you exited the training determined to resist as strenuously as you could without being detected and fired. If you attended something, you are now, they consider you to be tainted by DEI and subject to firing. That's pretty arbitrary and capricious. I know that they might find a conservative enough judge who will say, and the connection is obvious. DEI is a thing that can taint you. I mean, it's a dumb idea, but if you absorb that idea and buy into it, then you will say, well, it's not arbitrary or capricious here. You went to a DEI training. Well, yes, I also went to an efficiency training. That doesn't mean I'm efficient. I went to a training, I'd like to claim I'm efficient. Maybe I don't want to claim I'm sensitive to DEI. Doesn't matter. You went. There are DEI-focused personnel embedded throughout divisions that do not have any identifying DEI criteria in their name, one document states. Phase 2/3 will be focused on identifying these employees and putting them on administrative leave. Why? At least some of Phase 2 appears to be underway, particularly at the Education Department. The department last month placed on leave nearly 100 employees in non-DEI roles after dodgy staffers unearthed personnel records showing that most took a diversity training during, by the way, the first Trump administration. But imagine taking a diversity training. But, it's worth pointing out they did it during the first Trump administration. Why did they do it then? It probably wasn't because they were so excited about DEI training. It was probably because it was mandated by the first Trump administration that you take it. So they did. They obeyed Donald Trump's command, essentially, and took the training, and now they're being fired for listening to him, because of how much sense this makes. As of this week, dodgy representatives of the department have directed the agency to cancel 29 DEI training grants at the department, totaling $101 million, according to a post on X, anyway, from dodgy. We don't know how much those things cost, but it is entirely possible that that's the amount of money. And I guess I'll say this, as stupid as I think the whole targeting of DEI is, if they decide they don't want to have these trainings offered, that's not the worst thing in the world to cancel the ones going forward. To fire people who went to ones that you mandated before seems wrong. Anyway, it's unclear whether any federal workers assigned to DEI roles in offices required by law to have been offices that are required to exist by law have been placed on leave, mostly only because it's unclear who's in and who's out. Dodgy's Phase 3 plan starts later this month on the 31st day of the administration and lasts until the 180th day of the administration, which is in mid-July. The stage moves from placing workers on paid leave to calling for large-scale firings, the documents show. Ultimately, Dodgy intends for the Trump administration to terminate all DEI-linked employees via a reduction in force action, a RIF action as they call it for short, the federal form of layoffs, including some who work for legally mandated offices. Again, you can keep the office and get rid of the people. That's what they aim to do. But that's more adherence to the law than I thought they were really planning for, which is interesting. Goals for Phase 3 are listed in brief bullet points in the Dodgy document. RIF the Phase 1 offices in their entirety. One bullet point reads, referring to offices dedicated to DEI. That process is already underway. The Office of Personnel Management last month directed agencies to submit written plans for firing all DEI office workers and encouraged the agencies to begin issuing termination notices immediately. A second bullet point states, RIF the Phase 2 office's corrupted branches, referring to what Dodgy has determined are DEI elements of offices required by law. That bullet point concludes, we are exploring options. For this, one such option emerged this week. And again, if you don't have the plan yet, not a plan document. But we're going to get a plan later, 2 weeks. That's the way they dodge the requirement for planning. One such option emerged this week. On Tuesday, Trump signed yet another stupid executive order paving the way for federal agencies to reshape or terminate offices legally mandated to exist. Are we sure about that? Asked about Dodgy's planning efforts, the Trump administration said the team had the president's full backing. Don't know what that means, or how long that lasts. The White House position is that we are ridding the federal government of DEI full stop. White House spokesman said on Friday, Dodgy is there as a collaborator, ensuring that we get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. And it's interesting, they didn't stress it this way, but I will. And if DEI is waste, fraud, and abuse, it's gone. Well, I mean, I guess that's supposed to get you around arbitrary and capricious, but the definition and just declaring it to be waste, fraud, and abuse, well, that could be arbitrary too. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll read a little bit more of this and then try and make a lightning round survey of the many other stories that are out there. But this one is extensively reported, but my main takeaway from it is they didn't really push too hard to figure out why. And I mean, I guess they can't figure out why because the guys aren't answering them, and there's no answer to why. Well, why Dodgy folks feel entitled to run around saying DEI is bad. Why? Because Trump says so. Well, why? Because it's waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, how so? Because it's divisive. It's not. Inclusion is not divisive. Well, it is if you don't get included. Well, but they're including everybody. Yeah, well, they're not including enough of me. Too much of them and not enough of me. You just have the wrong idea about what inclusion means. Well, I think, therefore, it's waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, it's not. You need to establish that. And you can't. Anyway, so let's see. We left off just before taking on this next section here. Under what authority? And that's a basically good question here. Dodgy has maintained a veil of secrecy, refusing to disclose the names of staff, what positions they hold, or how much they are being paid. Kind of a major problem for governmental work. But the Post has reported that more than 30 people who work closely for or with Dodgy, about half of whom have ties to Musk or his companies. Okay. It has reported that more than 30 people work closely. Okay. In the first days of 2025, a subgroup of the Dodgy team began sketching out how to implement a government-wide elimination of DEI employees and programs, internal Dodgy documents show. So this is the first time that they sat down and wrote down, what does DEI mean and how are we going to get rid of them? And I think they skipped the part about why are we allowed to get rid of them. And that's where the problem lies. You're not. In early January, dodgy staffers started filling out spreadsheets tracking various diversity-related elements of the government, including DEI offices, contracts and spending, records and documents obtained by the Post show. Again, so here, if the president declares that DEI is bad, and you say, I will help implement the vision here, regardless of whether or not that's specific enough to pass muster under the Administrative Procedure Act, how do you do it? Well, make a list of everything that has the word diversity or inclusion or equity or any of the forbidden words or forbidden acronyms in it, and then fire all those people. It's an approach, but we're not sure whether it, gets past the arbitrary and capricious test. I guess the fact that you landed on these jobs and these departments based on the names of the departments, particularly if it actually includes all three elements of DEI or the A element of DEIA, as it's sometimes designated, I guess you can say, well, it's not arbitrary and capricious that I put them on the list. They meet the criteria. The question is, were the criteria initially arbitrary and capricious to begin with? And they have not sufficiently answered that question. In my view, and in the view of many of the administrative law judges and the federal district court judges that have treated the initial cases. You have made your list sensibly. The problem is that the direction given to you for making the list was arbitrary and capricious. That's the issue. And, two ways you could do this. The other one is, of course, suppose I give you perfectly reasonable guidance on the kind of list I want. I want anybody having to do with DEI, and let's say that's okay. And you say, I think the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission is DEI, and so therefore I put it on the list. Why do you think that? It's actually an enforcement office enforcing long-established civil rights and civil rights guidelines. Yeah, but it helps brown people, so that's DEI. That's arbitrary and capricious. I think that a person who went to a DEI training that was legally mandated under the previous Trump administration is tainted by DEI. No, that too is an arbitrary and capricious decision, or at least potentially each of these things. There are a lot of places where you can make that mistake, and if one such place exists, the odds that a Donald Trump administration will make it are near 100%. If 3 places exist, if 5 places exist where they can make that mistake, you're virtually guaranteed to find it in every case. So where were we here? In early July, they didn't know what else to do, so they started making spreadsheets tracking various diversity-related elements of the government and anybody that had a job that had D or an E or an I in it. The records show a handful of dodgy team members active in workshopping the plan. Stephanie Holmes, a former Jones Day lawyer who runs human resources of all parts, human resources at Dodgy. But she is a lawyer. So maybe she knows something about arbitrary and capricious and how many times you can make the mistake. It's not helping them, but she knows about it. Anthony Armstrong, a banker who advised Musk on his acquisition of Twitter. Brian, maybe Bielde, B-J-E-L-D-E, a 20-year, not 20-year-old, but a 20-year SpaceX employee. Guy's been working at SpaceX as long as some of the dodgy staffers have been alive. And Noah Peters, an attorney, there's a second one, who once worked at the Federal Labor Relations Authority. So some governmental experience, might even know what arbitrary and capricious is all about. Holmes, the Jones Day lawyer, was the creator of many of the documents and spreadsheets, according to metadata reviewed by the Post. Armstrong, Bielde, and Peters have been heavily involved in Dodgy's work reshaping the Office of Personnel Management. The Post and other outlets have reported. Another frequent contributor to the planning was Adam Ramada, like the inn, a Dodgy team member whom Business Insider has identified as a Miami venture capital investor with a stake in a SpaceX supplier. So give them a job in Dodgy and you'll get good terms on pricing for your materials for SpaceX. Ramada has recently been active in efforts to slash spending and staff at the education department, according to records obtained by the Post. Holmes, Armstrong, Bieldy, Peters, and Ramada could not be reached or did not respond to requests for comment. The Dodgy team identified 131 agencies within the federal government, then assigned one of at least 30 reviewers to examine all the agency's sub-offices and employees. Dodgy staffers searched each agency's structure and personnel for the terms diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, and justice, which is going to be a particular problem at the Department of Justice. You're going to get a lot of false hits on that one. Not that they care that they're false. Reviews were often completed within a day or two, records show, which, of course, Elon Musk running around saying, see, efficiency. We're efficient in our meeting out of efficiency. It only takes us a day or two to review the records. I mean, well, yeah, the job is I want you to list every federal agency and then every sub-agency within those agencies. All right. There are such lists. Okay, now I want you to search out the ones that say in the name diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, and justice. And I'm sure that somebody must have said, raise your hand, sir, question. What do I do? I got assigned the Department of Justice. What do I do? Now, normally you'd probably say, yeah, that's a tough one because justice is going to come up a lot. You'll have to use your judgment. Why don't you take a team member with you? And, make some decisions. Like if it's Department of Criminal Justice, then you would say, no, that's not DEI. But if it's Department of Diversity Justice, there isn't one. But if it said that, you would say, that's going to be on the list. But I think what they instead said, tell you what, just put them all in there. Put them all in the spreadsheet and we'll see what happens. So, of course, they took a day or two. The fact that it took 2 means you should have been fired. Name all the agencies. All right, it's easy. There's a list. Wikipedia. I'm done. All right. Well, good job. There's more. The group also compiled 2 lists. Imagine that. Entitled DEI Grants to Eliminate and DEI 10 Contracts to Eliminate. There's more contracts than that, but these are the 10. Because we only have a day, detailing roughly $380 million in spending from NASA, the Labor Department, the Defense Department, and Health and Human Services. Now, there's more departments than that. There's more than $380 million involved in that. But this is what we did in a day or two. It's not very ambitious. Most of the contracts were for DEI training, professional development services, or workplace climate surveys. Okay. If you don't want to do them going forward, again, that might be an option for you. Grants marked for cancellation included a $22.2 million nursing workforce diversity program at the Health Resources and Services Administration, meant to encourage nursing careers for racial and ethnic minorities. I mean, really not that harmful, but, DEI, so we got to get rid of it. $22 million. It's big money for you and me, small for a gigantic department like Health and Human Services. There's also, for instance, another $8.35 million in fair housing initiatives to promote racial desegregation, including by ending neighbor harassment based on race. It's a bad thing. Should they eliminate it? I think you should. Can you do it? Well, with $8.35 million, that might help. Well, how about we not do it? That's the big innovation over at Doge. And citing an article from the conservative media outlet Daily Wire as their inspiration, which should never be the case for anything, Dodgy team members analyzed more than 800 federal job postings with DEI responsibilities on usajobs.com to determine that 50 had been filled in 2024. 50? Wow. What are we going to do about that? Well, nothing. We'll fire those people, I guess. 800 federal job postings that had DEI responsibilities. 50 of them actually filled in the last year, so they want to unfill them. 50. That's going to make that the case cracker, honey. The employee names are not available. I found that kind of funny. Like, I thought these guys broke in and got the names of everybody. One dodgy spreadsheet reads, but included below is as much information available about each of the jobs so we can find the hired employees in phase 2. Like I said, they're not hard-working guys, right? How many of these jobs were listed last year? 800. Wow, 800 people were going to be able to fire? Well, no, only 50 of them actually got filled. Huh, I wonder why that is. Well, find those people and fire them. We can't. Why not? Like, you found the job listings, right? Yeah. And the job was for the Department of what? Education. And they were working in the office of, workplace diversity. And that was the job of Director of Workplace Diversity. All right. Who's got that job? Call the Department of Education and find out who's got that job, then write their name down. Well, I'd rather just put in the spreadsheet that we don't have the name yet. I get the sense. There's another very important story that developed over the weekend that we easily could have read and spent time on that you may have already seen as well, in which the dodgy staffers stumble upon the National Nuclear Security Administration and somehow manage to miss the fact that nuclear security is important and lay off a whole bunch of workers there. Now, I don't know what that has to do with diversity. I don't know what it has to do with equity. I don't know what it has to do with inclusion. These people apparently, we'll read you the story at some point, are in the, well, a lot of the people who are laid off are in the job of physically securing the guts of nuclear weapons. Physics packages, as they call them, is a very weird euphemism. Bombs, the fissionable material that explodes to make a nuclear weapon particularly bad and hot. Okay. And for whatever reason, these things move around with some frequency, and they stopped and fired all the teams that were in transit. Everybody really, but huge swaths of this National Nuclear Security Agency group. And then found out afterwards, oh my God, that's extraordinarily important. They're securing nuclear weapons. And they said, we got to rehire them. It's a disaster. I guess the dodgy people didn't do that. But I guess the people in the Department of Energy said, no, I can't. Well, while we were out over the weekend, you fired these people. Now, by the way, they're stranded in transit with nuclear bombs on a truck. And they're now told they're unemployed. What are they going to do? Are they going to just like park the nuclear weapon at the hotel they were staying in overnight and leave? That's bad. By the way, if they're looking for something to do, I think they should all drive to Mar-a-Lago and park their bombs there and say, this belongs to you. See you later. And if any Chinese people who are members of the Mar-a-Lago because they're spying for China there want to take it, we'll leave the keys, on top of the shade, right? It's on the top of the tire. Take the bomb if you want. But apparently they said, all right, well, we got to rehire these people. It's extraordinarily dangerous leaving unguarded nuclear weapons all over the place, or whatever might be the result from this. I imagine that though they were fired, they decided, I think I will just stay with this thing and make sure that it gets into safe hands. I'm going to lose some money. I'm not going to be able to work as a Walmart greeter for these couple of days, but I'll make it up later. By not dying in a nuclear conflagration, right? But apparently they could not. The problem was they said we want to rehire them, but when they fired them, they turned off their emails. Now, I'm not certain why it is that the tech geniuses that they brought in can't turn the emails back on, but I suppose it's possible that people say, well, my email's turned off. To hell with that. I'll delete that account from my phone. I don't know, whatever. But they say, well, we want to rehire people, but we cannot figure out how to reach them anymore. And I was like, again, I thought the story yesterday was you stole everybody's personal information from every place, right? You didn't steal their names, telephone numbers, addresses, personal email accounts that they applied for the job with, nothing. You don't have any of that. I can't believe that that's the case. Though I did think that it was possible that since they were all 20-somethings, they had that information, but they hate making phone calls. So they're like, I don't know, I texted the guy, you're rehired, and he didn't answer. And that's as far as they're willing to take it. After that, I deal with that at home all the time. I don't know. It's extraordinarily important to me to get this job or pass this class. What'd you do to try to help yourself? I don't know. I texted the teacher, but I texted a guy about the job, and he said, apply. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Here, they've identified 50 people who got into jobs that had DEI responsibilities, but they can't figure out how to find out who those people are, at least not within a whole day or two. I have to play Roblox. I got to leave. Saturday Night Live is on Sunday. I can't help you. The documents also detail scripts for what the Office of Personnel Management staff should say in calls to interim agency heads, explaining the president's anti-DEI executive order, as well as what those interim agency heads should say in calls to employees tasked with carrying out that order, which is really, to me, feels like the same call. But I guess here is the only place where dodgy arguments about layers and layers of bureaucracy make any sense. I have to call an agency head and explain why we're firing everybody. Okay, that should be all the calls you have to make. But then the agency head will say, well, I don't actually fire them. So you need to call the people who are going to do the firing and tell them why, what they should say when they fire people. Which, I could see the conversation at that point saying, see, this is the problem. I've just explained it to you. It's your agency. You go fire them and tell them what I told you. Or if you want to insist that an underling do the firing, you explain it to them. You just heard my spiel. Repeat it to the people you want to do the firing. But instead, they schedule a second call. The first set of calls were supposed to last 15 minutes each. They blocked it out. The second set were supposed to last 20 minutes. The script shows. I don't know whether they timed the scripts or whether it says this is how long your call should take at the top, which would be a little weird. But okay. The guides for agency heads included the instructions, quote, it is important that we implement these changes swiftly, but always with care and respect for our employees, which is about the rough equivalent of the footnote that we heard about the other day in the memo telling you, I want you to drop the Eric Adams case. P.S. This is not a quid pro quo. Well, here's a clip from the documents. Oh, this is the phase 1, day 1 thing. Anyway, the dodgy documents further include suggested versions of the email that agencies would send to inform employees in DEI roles that they were being placed on administrative leave. The emails sent to each or such employees in January match the dodgy draft email nearly word for word, the post-examination found, and that's not a surprise. I wouldn't want to rewrite that. A FAQ page that Dodgy created for agency heads showed that the team members did not always feel confident in the powers they were assuming. In one version of the draft FAQ, the second question, posed from the perspective of an agency head, asks, under what authority are you directing us to do this? That's a frequently asked question, I imagine. Beneath the question is one word highlighted in yellow. And it's not a word. It's an abbreviation, an acronym, or not an acronym, but yeah, just an abbreviation. EO, referring to Trump's executive order. E and O, you see? So when you say, so by what authority are you insisting that I fire so many hundreds of my employees? Answer, EO. E-I-E-I-O? Or just EO? Just EO. Next to the acronym, in a set of brackets, there is a single character apparently questioning whether such an order would be sufficient. What is that character? It is a question mark. So this is their suggested answers to frequently asked questions. Under what authority are you directing us to do this? EO? Is that how you maybe it's the EO? Like, what if I say, no, the EO does not say that I have to do this, or the EO does not apply to this? Maybe yes, though? You have an arbitrary and capricious problem. It's right in front of you. So let's see. I'll read a little bit more of this because this is very revealing. I know it's very dry and weedy, but this just, I think, illustrates the weakest points of all this stuff and why it's causing such confusion and I don't know, consternation. I don't know. I want to use a $10 word on that one. Corrupted branches is this next part. Over the course of about 3 weeks, the dodgy team outlined a plan to radically reshape the government, including proposing shutting down offices required by law, but it also occasionally toned down its ambitions. Can you believe that? A dodgy document dated January 9th identifies 225 DEI-related offices and councils across the federal government. Good work there. Took you a couple of days to just Control F search DEI. 42 of these should be shuttered immediately under Trump's Day 1 executive order, the document says. The rest, including civil rights and employment discrimination offices mandated by law, should be terminated later. Like by repealing the law or just later, because we want it to be later. A later document dated January 13th walked that back. A lawyer came along and said, yeah, this part where you're just going to executive order eliminate things that are statutorily required isn't really going to work. And they listened, which is amazing. Under the revised plan, the dodgy team reduced the number of targeted DEI offices to 76. So we saved $1 trillion. We found 225 DEI-related offices. How many did you say? I said 76. That's less. Dodgy also shifted the plan. The aim would be to cut staff from offices required by law rather than eliminate those offices outright. Right? So again, the lawyers came along. Why don't you just eliminate the whole department? Well, it's required by law. Why don't you just ignore the law? Well, we can't. Okay. So why don't we say that that's not really DEI? Or we made a mistake and we don't want to eliminate that one. Oh, wait. Why don't we do this? If it's required to exist, how about if it doesn't say it can't just barely exist, right? There you have something. And yet still, only 76 of the original 225 survive the first round of scrutiny. A lawyer comes in and says, are you sure these things have anything to do with DEI? Yes, I'm positive. Are you sure that they're not statutorily mandated? What do you mean by statutorily mandated? We mean required by law to exist. No, I mean, what does law mean? I don't understand that. Required by law. Nothing's required by law. We just get rid of it. The president gets rid of it. No, that's not the way it works. Here's how things work in the real world. All right. Well, having reviewed that, not 225, 76. Now, the January 13th document listed 38 statutorily mandated offices, i.e. the equal employment opportunity or civil rights offices, which, though they are mandatory by law, have nonetheless, as they say, quote, been corrupted with new DEI divisions. The new plan, the document shows, was to identify the non-statutory branches / DEI employees and place them on administrative leave. By January 17th, Dodgy had reduced its goals still further, naming 33 offices protected by law that should be trimmed down to eliminate DEI elements. The list includes offices of equal employment opportunity at agencies including the Agriculture Department, the Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It also includes 100-plus staff from the Energy Department's Office of Energy, Justice, and Equity. As of last month, the total number of employees Dodgy planned to cut in its DEI purge was at least 583, according to a spreadsheet. I know that's terrible for the 583, but remember that we were seeing headlines just last week. 10,000, 50,000, whatever. They were just doing it and throwing out numbers arbitrarily and capriciously. And we're down to 583. On the one hand, like, those lying a-holes. On the other hand, good. It's fewer people than we thought. On the other hand, maybe they're actually like listening to lawyers after all, and that might be a good thing, but also / a bad thing because they might actually be able to accomplish some of this stuff in the end. I don't know. Anyway, 583 people, according to now the big bad spreadsheet, down from several 100,000. But probably the number is more, far more, since the dodgy staffers, you'll never believe it, stopped filling out employee tallies for targeted offices about a third of the way through the document. They just quit. Too much work for us to do, even though we're just Control F searching these things and asking AI chatbots. The goal is to fire all employees identified as doing any kind of DEI-related work, the documents make clear. The problem is that they keep running into these law things, and they have to ask people who have actually studied the law, what do we do? And then when they told us, we got bored and left. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, we're almost at the end of this article, and I know this is going to drive Scott crazy because we haven't cited enough things, but I'll round up all sorts of things that we made aside comments about and try and do a little bit more and hit a number of other items maybe quickly in this last segment. We left off reading that essentially the team got bored filling out this spreadsheet. That's all they were ever asked to do, is just do a search for words and to make a spreadsheet of it all. And that's really something you can automate. And they still got bored and stopped doing it about a third of the way through. Now, noble idea here in the offing. Dodgy staffers worked through several iterations of how they could do all of this stuff without running afoul of the law, the records show. And so that's very interesting. I'm glad that you spent the time. Please tell us how to do this without running afoul of the law. Then, as we said, they got bored a third of the way through and started running afoul of the law. Well, the training was there. They just didn't go. And they should be fired for it because that's waste as well as fraud and abuse. But apparently that won't be flagged as such because we've made the arbitrary and capricious decision not to flag it as waste, even though we paid for it and you didn't listen and you didn't execute any of it, but you still got paid. That's waste. You're fired. Guess not. One January planning document lays out Dodgy's vision for how to terminate employees in direct DEI roles. Now, we've been at this for some time now and reading this thing for some time, and they've been at work for some time. And what I really just can't understand is like why 19, 20 different times you have to write down a document that says, hey, what's the Dodgy vision again? Like, we all know, right? You and I have heard this several times, even just in the course of this hour or so. You would be able to say, terminate employees in DEI roles. Yes, right, correct. You actually were listening. And you didn't execute any of it, but you still got paid. That's waste. You're fired. Not, guess not. One January planning document lays out Dodgy's vision for how to terminate employees in direct DEI roles. Now, we've been at this for some time now and reading this thing for some time, and they've been at work for some time. And what I really just can't understand is like why 19, 20 different times you have to write down a document that says, hey, what's the Dodgy vision again? Like, we all know, right? You and I have heard this several times, even just in the course of this hour or so. You would be able to say, terminate employees in DEI roles. Yes, right, correct. You actually were listening. Here's a planning document from another date in January laying out Dodgy's vision for how to terminate employees in direct DEI roles. Why don't you just do it? I thought we were all about just be direct. Why don't you just? And what were we going to do? Fire DEI people? Yeah. And how do we define it? Pretty much whoever we don't like, or if they're regulating us, or if there's a brown person around. Yeah. So why this other document? I don't know. Well, anyway, this one includes a table analyzing the pros and cons of 3 possible options for, quote, handling the employees who work out of each DEI office, unquote. One option, let's see if this requires any really good consultant level thinking. One option, fire DEI staffers immediately. All right. But that brought the highest risk of challenge and potential injunction, the document noted. The lawyer was working on that one. Another option was to reassign DEI staff to a new office. But that would delay their goal of overall staff reductions, according to the document. A third option, labeled Doge ellipsis recommended, and I'm not certain whether the ellipsis stands in for anything that was in there that they didn't, that was extraneous, or whether it's just, quote, that's the quote, Doge ellipsis recommended. So this is the one they recommend. Okay, again, the other 2 options, fire everybody immediately. That'll cause problems. Fire everybody later. That'll cause problems. Third option, suggested placing DEI employees on a 10-day paid administrative leave and then firing them. So, I guess it's a third option, right? What if we fire them all now? Problem. What if we fire them all later? Well, then it's late. What if we fire them all less later? That is to say, sooner. Oh, well, now you are onto something. How many days? 10. Why? Sounds like a good number. Arbitrary and capricious. Why 10? I really, honest to God, dude, my Call of Duty group is on Discord right now saying I got to get to work on shooting fake people. Shooting fake people. All right. We'll just leave it at 10 then and hope that passes muster. So now the third option, the third genius option, fire them sometime in the middle of the 2 options that don't work. All right. According to the document, this approach was best because it was, quote, difficult to challenge, you think? Reasonable legal authority exists to extend beyond 10 days, and it allows time for legal preparation to anticipated challenges. So also very interesting in this one is either fire them all now. That's not going to work. Fire them all very much later. That isn't going to work. Fire them all at some point in between the 2. How many? 10 days. What if there's a problem? Make it 20. All right. I guess but I feel like the real innovation would coming up with a 4th way, but apparently not. This appears to be the option that agencies across federal government are following. That is to say, we're not actually very efficient in doing this. We said 10 days, but it could take 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, possibly 100. Also, options are 110, 20, 122, 127.5, 127.6, but you get the idea. Phase 3 of the Trump administration's DEI purge is slated to begin Wednesday, according to the documents. That period lasts until July 19th, or the 180th day of the presidency. By the way, why stop at 180 days? Arbitrary. But, you're entitled to pick a target date. It is arbitrary, but I don't think that's going to trip you up. But if you end up firing a person because it's the 180th day and not because they've done anything wrong, that would be arbitrary. At that point, the deadline wouldn't matter very much. It would be just an arbitrary deadline. But setting a goal seems okay. Throughout this period, Dodgy has large ambitions to cull staff, the documents show. It's good they put it down. We have large ambitions. But as of mid-January, team members were not yet sure how to accomplish the firings. People aren't answering their texts that say you're fired. We'll have to make phone calls. Yuck. The Phase 3 period is supposed to include 3 workflows per a dodgy planning document. First, the Trump administration will identify and place on leave, quote, additional DEI-related employees, unquote, who do not work in a DEI office, but are, quote, dispersed through normal operating divisions, unquote. Second, the administration will lay off DEI offices in their entirety. Third, the administration will lay off the corrupted branches, quote unquote, corrupted branches of statutorily required offices that work on civil rights and employment discrimination. We are exploring options for this, the document reads. Now, not only is the document a weird mishmash and disjointed and repetitive, but this article has now gotten to the point where we're like, yeah, I feel like you've already said this. To which I'm sure the authors would say, well, we're just sort of reporting how repetitive and scattered this guidance that they're getting is. Maybe that might be, I don't know. Or else it's like, I need more words for this article. Just give them to me over and over again. I feel like we're reading the same thing over and over again. A set of bullet points headlined "Next Steps Underway" shows that dodgy staffers were actively looking for legal arguments to justify the planned firings. They did bring a lawyer in, and here too, you have an arbitrary and capricious problem. Now, you may eventually overcome it, but it's not going to help that the documents say, Phase 1. Put everybody on administrative leave with an eye toward firing them. Phase 2, this isn't the phases, but I mean, the document could have been a lot tighter and probably should have said, except if you write this down, you're in legal trouble, but this is what they did anyway. Part 2, look for legal justification for Part 1. No. Part 1, seek legal justification. Part 2, execute that which is legal. That would have been the smarter approach. But, by the way, at some point it might have been, if you really wanted a good, tight thing that was going to stand up to scrutiny, preamble, legal justification, and reason for bringing this measure forward. What's the point? What's the goal in governmental operations? And remember that frequently asked questions list? Remember the second question on the list? Under what authority are we doing this? That needs to be, I don't know what question number 1 was, but for the document, that needs to be statement number 1. By the following, authority, we are explaining what our legal justification for these firings are, and then I'll tell you which firings they involve. Anyway, a spreadsheet from January 17th suggests a path. It's good that they have a path suggested. There, under the headline, or the heading, Broad Ideas, that's not good, is a proposal for presidential action. Oh, now I thought this whole thing was prompted by presidential action, but now they have some suggestions for what the president should do in order to give them the authority that they said they had by virtue of the executive orders, but apparently not. Here's what he should do. Issue an executive order to refocus equal employment opportunity offices on their statutory mandate, removing DEI from them. The executive order Trump signed this week may serve that goal. The order calls on federal agency heads to develop reorganization plans. I thought that's what dodgy was, the reorganization planning people. Within 30 days, agency heads are supposed to produce a report identifying the laws that created their agency. They know that already, as well as every agency office that is required by law. The order concludes, the report shall discuss whether the agency or any of its subcomponents should be eliminated or consolidated. Now, I would file no in that section, but that's the end of the article. But again, what we finally ended up with here is, all right, we want to reform government. I want to reform. I'm Donald Trump, and I want to reform the government. How will I do it? Okay, Elon Musk, you take over. You do it. Okay, fine. We're going to create the dodgy office We don't create anything. We just say that's the name of the thing you're going to be doing. All right, I want you to bring in a whole bunch of help. All right, you do. All right, what should we do? We should fire a bunch of people. Who should we fire? And essentially, they then say, I guess everybody involved in DEI. How do we identify them? We'll do a word search. Okay. But that could run into legal trouble. Oh, yeah. So what should we do? We should make a list of every agency there is. And then what? And then we'll email those agencies and we'll say, I want you to file a report with us. Okay. On what? Well, part one of the report should be, why are you an agency? How did that happen? You could look that up. I know, but I want you to look it up. Why? Because I'm so efficient. I'm delegating. I'm a very efficient guy. You tell me, what's the name of your agency? Why are you here? And then also tell me, how could we make you not an agency? That's it. That's the upshot of it. There's 15 versions of the dodgy working papers that do everything from, why don't we just fire everybody because we say so, to, well, why don't we fire everybody because the president already said so, to, well, okay, he didn't say so in the correct way, so why doesn't he say it this way, and then we'll do it. And then the president says it, and then you still say, here's what we would really like is for the agencies, everybody write your name on a piece of paper and tell me how you got here, and then hand it back to me. And then some unknown thing will happen, question mark, question mark, question mark, steal underpants, question mark, profit. That's it. I mean, this is their organizing principle. What was the name of this article again? Records show how dodgy planned Trump's DEI purge. No, they didn't. They show how they couldn't figure out how to do any of it, and how when a lawyer came along, they said, oh, none of this is going to work. Why don't we ask the agencies to do it for us? Well, then why are you here? What's Doji? You were the most efficient, yada, yada, and you were going to find out. And your answer is, why don't we have them tell us? Well, we already could have had them tell us. And in fact, we don't even need them to tell us. Wikipedia will tell us, or CRS will tell us. We didn't need any of this, but we have 30 20-year-olds named Big Balls doing this on the payroll in the name of efficiency because reasons. I don't know. I find it fascinating when you dig through it, and also find it fascinating that all of this stuff is laid out in front of the reporters' eyes, and they're like, I don't know, maybe they feel restricted in saying, this is super dumb. These guys are idiots. We'll just do the news thing. Here, we'll show you how repetitive and dumb and circular all of this is without saying, and the problem is it's dumb and circular, because if we do that, then Jeff Bezos will fire us. Another story from over the weekend. I didn't put this one aside, but I guess it should be pretty easy to find. I guess somebody wanted to take out an ad of some kind criticizing Elon Musk. And despite the fact that I guess the operation over there at the Washington Post could use the money, they decided, nope, we're going to reject this ad because it's critical of Elon Musk, who does not own the Washington Post. We already know that cartoons critical of Jeff Bezos and others, who does own the Washington Post, was out. Now ads criticizing people who have more money, I guess, but who are also jerks than Jeff Bezos are somehow out, and I'm not really sure what the basis for that was. Also, over the weekend, I did see that Elon Musk X has banned the account of yet another targeted political cartoonist. The cartoonist made fun of Elon Musk in the cartoon, and X actually sent them the whole termination letter and everything saying, yeah, your cartoon violates the standards. It was the one you've probably seen by now too. Elon Musk standing in front of, I guess, a giant pile of bags of money and whatnot, and the poor and starving children of the world are before him, with bowls begging for something to eat, and he basically says, no, sorry, it's a big waste of time. But I don't remember the punchline of the joke, but we can go and find this thing. But he tells him basically, go F yourself. You cost too much money or whatever, and I have all the money now, and haha. And, it was a insightful and biting cartoon, but that too has just no profanity in it, no nudity of any kind, nothing that actually violates X's standards, but it made fun of Elon Musk, and so therefore, the free speech absolutist was upset with it. All right, we got to make another quick round of other dumb things that I feel like you should know about. Like I said, there was a lot of development in the story of how they got somebody to sign the paperwork to dismiss the Adams case. I can link you to a bunch of things like that. People pointing out that Pam Bondi immediately stepping into office and saying, yeah, you should make this case dismissal is something that should have led to her firing and impeachment immediately, but not in this administration and not with this Republican Congress. A side note that I thought was of some interest, there was at some point a claim made by Elon Musk that they were one of the other examples of many claimed by Elon Musk and the dodgy wackos that they had found was fraud and abuse in Social Security. In particular, let's see if I can open this thing up correctly, that they had found in their database searches that there were thousands of people being paid Social Security benefits who appeared to be over 150 years old, or 150, in fact, exactly 150 years old. And that's impossible, and nobody's ever lived to 150 years old. And that was proof that Social Security was paying dead people, and that's waste, fraud, and abuse. And can't you see it's right in front of our noses? I can't believe you dummies couldn't realize it, whereas us brain geniuses could. All we had to do was parse the data and find this out. Look at this, thousands and thousands of people all born in 1875, which really, honestly, if you just say spreadsheet, spit out the age of people, or give me the list of people who seem impossibly old or whatever, and you just print it out and you're like, look at the number of pages and the number of entries on each page here. That is data. And I am going to go and I'm going to make an announcement. I'm going to wave it. I have in my hand, right? Data indicating waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, see, there's a thing. And here is the tweet, post, I don't know where it comes from, of Ashmore _Glenn. We're going to call that guy Glenn Ashmore, is my guess. Who says, I'm an old programmer, coder in today's parlance, and many old programmers, like Glenn here, know COBOL, the programming language, COBOL, in case you don't know it. Young coders don't. It's not used at all anymore. I mean, it does if you're tinkering with the systems made in COBOL that are still hanging around, and this is one of them. When the muskrat, as he puts it here, claims that Social Security is paying thousands of 150-year-olds, I think someone should let him know that in COBOL, if a date is missing, the program defaults to 1875. Now, why is that? We'll get to that in a second. In other words, 2025 minus 1875, the default date, happens to be exactly 150. So Social Security is paying thousands and thousands of 150-year-olds, not people over an age of 150, not thousands and thousands of people between the ages of 125 and 150, but thousands and thousands of 150-year-olds. And a few seconds of flipping through and saying, why are there no 149-year-olds? Why are there no 151-year-olds? Why are there no 137-year-olds in this list? What is going on here? Am I seeing something? Is there a pattern I should be discerning? Isn't that the brain genius thing that they hired me for? Not printing out sheets and saying, look at how many pages, but what does it mean? Well, Carly Kingsley helps us understand a little bit more of the context. Why 1875? She says, correct, to Glenn Ashmore, if the birth date field contains corrupt or mismatched or missing data, right, it defaults to May 20th, 1875. Well, that's nice and neat, but why? Why 1875? Why May 20th, 1875? It serves as a flag, by the way. I mean, basically, if you see it over and over again, how is it that there's thousands and thousands of people, not only all of whom are 150 years old, not 149, not 137, but 150 years old, and they're all 150 years old because they were all born on May 20th, 1875, which I think would make them 149 years old, by the way. But whatever. I don't know if the date, I don't know if they were estimating 150. I don't know. I'm not certain what was on the spreadsheet. But what they have here is thousands and thousands of people all born on the same date, which, you know, suspicious conspiracy theorists say, aha, we've uncovered a massive plot. Well, it certainly should get you to notice the information and should flag the information. And it has, right? They've taken notice of this. Why May 20th, though? May 20th, 1875, as it turns out, is the day that the International Standards and Metrics Treaty was signed. And I wonder whether was that the establishment of the metric system, among other things? I don't know. But there you have it. There's an international event that takes place May 20th, 1875. That's adopted as the default date in COBOL programming. For some reason, they do it. But no, everything is a conspiracy theory when you don't know how anything works, says Carly. And I think you got it right there. I found that very fascinating, but mostly fascinating. I mean, it was a great fact to learn. I haven't fact checked it. Somebody want to Google whether or not May 20th, 1875 is in fact the day that the International Standards and Metrics Treaty was signed. Sounds truthy. I'm willing to go with it. But yeah, the fact that they got this data back, and instead of saying, what do I see here and what does it mean to me, that they're all the same date, thousands and thousands of people, could mean somebody is faking something, and apparently a very old or a long time ago fraud from the 1940s, 1950s, Social Security. Yeah. They put 1875, but they put the same date over and over and over again in COBOL before COBOL was invented. I don't know. That's one thing you could do. But honestly, what you should be doing is saying, not look at how many pages I have, but what the F does this mean? And can I get to the bottom of this? And are these checks really going out to people? And where do they live? And can we go over there and find out that they're not 150 years old? No. We're going to have a press conference first. I don't know. I found that one kind of interesting for a number of reasons. Let's see. A few other things. Well, very few other things, because it's getting close to time for us to sign off for the day. I thought this one was somewhat interesting. After, you remember seeing, did you hear Donald Trump doing another one of his press sprays from the Oval Office, in which he was saying, you know, a lot of these people, these federal government employees, they're scamming everybody. They're holding down 2-3 jobs and they're not showing up to work. And that's why we're making them come back to the office, because they're out. He said they're playing golf and tennis. I don't think so. Pickleball, more likely than anything, but playing golf and tennis or holding down another job. They're getting another job somewhere else, which I thought would make them smart. But, you know, no, he doesn't believe in that. They should be at work for the federal government, not working at their other job. Well, Wired has still more to tell you about something. We're just going to do it in the form of the headline here. Elon Musk's man in the Treasury is still holding down his day job as a software CEO. Well, every Republican accusation is a confession, as it turns out. Who are we talking about? Tom Krause, whose name came up in a couple of the articles last week in Wired, is, quote, currently, it says, the CEO of the Cloud Software Group. Critics believe this could be a massive conflict of interest. And not just that, It is, of course, the confession of the Republicans. Now we know where the idea of holding down the job, a second job, and collecting money from it while you have a federal salary came from. All right. Time now to start getting ready to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We're not quite there yet, but lots to share tomorrow, and perhaps tomorrow, depending on how the public service work goes over in Greg's place. Maybe he can come in and make a appearance on Tuesday, given that we're going to miss things on Wednesday. By the way, also along the way, or on our way out the door, I'll let you know, Scott shared something with me that's complimentary, I think, to the article that we actually read. This from Judd Legum's Popular Information Substack, or of some sort of I think. I don't want to accuse anybody of being on Substack these days if it's not the case, but it certainly looks like a Substack piece. Judd Legum and Rebecca Crosby wrote this piece. In Botched DEI Purge, OSHA trashes workplace safety guidelines. You know, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Apparently, more than just firing people, they are up to pulling down the decorations like the kids in school did overseas when the Hegseths showed up. OSHA has ordered the digital and physical destruction of 18 publications on workplace safety practices, according to an internal email from February 7th. The email says the publications have been removed from the OSHA website and tells staff that any physical copies should be disposed of or recycled. Get rid of work you've already done because something, and somebody might think it's about diversity. There is that famous government efficiency that Doge is promoting. I also happen to see, I think, Brandon Friedman over the weekend pointing out that the Army bases around the country, and some in particular that he had in mind, were pulling information out and destroying parts of the history of the units stationed there if they, too, hinted at anything having to do with diversity. And guess what?
From netrootsradio.com.
Sometimes they do. I'll tell you the specific example in just a second if I can find it.
With David Waldman.
And I can't. I'm watching too many egg things being circulated. At any rate, it was the particular units in the Army bases that had been sent to Little Rock, Arkansas to help with the desegregation of the public schools there. This is a part of their actual genuine history, which they actually had to erase from their museums because, oh no, DEI. We'll see you tomorrow.